The National Mobilization for Reproductive Justice, initiated by radical women in October 2021, sees attempts to undermine the right to reproductive and bodily autonomy as an attack on all people's lives and healthcare needs. The mobilization and its affiliates across the country are a growing grassroots coalition of organizations, unions, and individuals working to resist and rid us of these right wing political assaults. We believe in arming ourselves with valid facts and information on the various aspects of this issue, and we want to share them with you. Today, we are presenting an excellent educational on bodily autonomy.
We're going to talk about bodily autonomy, namely, what is bodily autonomy and the threats to it, how we protect our bodily autonomy in the US and globally. First, what is bodily autonomy? While I was researching, I found this definition given by the UN. Bodily autonomy means that we have the power and agency to make choices over our bodies and futures without violence or coercion. This includes when, whether, or with whom to have sex. It includes when, whether, or with whom you want to become pregnant. It means the freedom to go to a doctor whenever you need one. Basically, bodily autonomy means that my body is for me and my body is my own. I get to make the choices what to do with my body, with whom, and I get to keep my body alive and healthy. There are threats to bodily autonomy, and these threats can be sort of categorized in three sections, though all categories are violence. The first is violation. Violation includes sexual assault, virginity or homosexuality checks. So in some areas where people will check a person for sexual activity and invade their bodies, female genital mutilation, and forced sterilization. The second is coercion, or forcing someone to do something with their body that they do not want to do. This includes partner reproductive coercion, where a partner forces someone to have children when or if they don't want to, contraception tampering, and removal of education and healthcare. That last bit is important because without education and healthcare, people cannot make the choices they need to, or even know what choices they have with their body, so they can't have full bodily autonomy. Finally, the big threat to bodily autonomy is murder. This includes honor killings, homophobic and transphobic violence, and lack of medical intervention. All of these ends people's lives and violates their right to live the way that they would like to with the body that they have. While a lot of the threats we discussed to bodily autonomy are interpersonal, it's important to remember that while people can violate bodily autonomy, so can laws. Laws, governments, organizations, and systems can actually violate bodily autonomy. Let us talk about a few examples of these threats to bodily autonomy that are done through laws. The ability to manage your reproductive choices through contraception and abortion is bodily autonomy. However, globally, 215 million women aren't using contraception, but want to stop or delay having children. Now, it's important that when we say women, that is because that is what the statistics say. But we know that not only women can have children. This affects both trans men and non-binary people who can give birth. Amnesty International estimates hundreds of millions of people who can get pregnant are left without a choice, meaning that they don't have the rights to choose when to have children or how to stop them. Across the globe, the ability to have reproductive choice is taken away by law, as without contraception, one of the ways that these people have to choose to have children or to stop having children is through abortion. However, 41% of women who live in countries where abortion is banned, restricted, or inaccessible. This is according to the Center of Reproductive Rights in a 2019 report. Of course, that report was written years ago, so some countries like the US have restricted abortion further, meaning that number is possibly an underestimate. Restricting abortion doesn't stop abortions. It just makes the normally safe procedure of abortions deadly by forcing those who need abortions to go outside the law, including having back alley abortions or committing violence against their body. It's also important to say that restricting abortions actually leads to even more abortions. Countries with abortion restrictions have as many abortions as countries that don't have any restrictions against abortion. In fact, when controlling for the populations of China and India, countries with restrictions against abortion actually have more abortions than countries that don't. And of course, these restrictions aren't just against abortion, but restricting abortion restricts all autonomy for everyone. For example, in the US, the right to abortion is the same rights that allow for interracial marriage, same-sex marriage, contraception, and more. These are the rights to privacy, which gives people the same bodily autonomy to marry who they want or to have sex with who they want, as well as to have access to contraception and abortion. When we have restrictions against abortion, we restrict those rights as well. Another example of a threat to bodily autonomy is forced sterilization. Over 60,000 coercive sterilizations have been performed in the US. Beginning in 1907, states begin to authorize the sterilization of what they considered the feeble-minded, aka people with physical and mental disabilities. This widespread success of these eugenicist policies in the US directly influenced Nazi Germany and their policies during the Holocaust. These sterilizations, of course, directly affected the marginalized, because aside from being inherently ableist, racist, and classist, they were also coercive. Many people were forcibly sterilized without their consent, and or were even unaware that they were sterilized. An example of this forcible sterilization occurred in 1961 when activist Fannie Lou Hamer was admitted to the hospital to remove a tumor from her uterus, only to be given a hysterectomy without her consent. These surprise and unconsented to hysterectomies to Black women in the South were so common that they were jokingly called a Mississippi appendectomy. In the 70s, there started to be a number of court cases against these coercive, forcible sterilizations, including 1974's Ralph versus Weinberger, which involved the forced sterilization of a 12 and 14-year-old pair of Black sisters whose illiterate mom unknowingly consented to their sterilization. In fact, their mother signed the same document that forcibly removed her daughter's inability to choose their family with an X because she couldn't read the document that she signed. She had no idea what she was consenting to. While it may seem that these forcible sterilizations are a thing of the past, it's important to note that they're still happening across the country. Between 2006 and 2010, almost 150 women that we know of were forcibly sterilized in prisons in California, a very liberal state. In fact, these occurrences happening so recently that just a few years ago, in 2020, there was a whistleblower who came forward about forced sterilizations in an ICE facility in Georgia, echoing what happened to Fannie Lou Hamer over 40 years ago. These women in ICE facilities went to the doctor to get tumors, fibroids, and other reproductive health accommodations, only to wake up realizing that their uteruses were removed without their consent. In fact, one doctor was so notoriously known for doing this that they were referred to as the uterus collector. Another threat to bodily autonomy is against the LGBTQ community. The LGBTQ community has been fighting for bodily autonomy for decades, fighting for the rights to be with whom they want to be with, present the way they want to present, have families the way that they want to have families and when they want to have families, retain their children, and have access to healthcare and education. Recently, there have been a number of attacks against trans rights, which is part of that long fight for bodily autonomy in the LGBTQ plus community. The US right is focusing their attacks on LGBTQ bodily autonomy on trans youth. This is extremely scary when you realize that care for trans teens reduces suicidality by 73%. A recent study from the University of Washington in Seattle found that trans care, including youth puberty blockers and gender-affirming hormones, had a 73% lower odds of suicidality versus trans teens who didn't receive that care. If there was a drug or antidepressant in the world that reduced teen suicidality by 73%, it would be known as a wonder drug and a miracle. However, 13 US states have so far banned care for trans minors, including most recently Indiana and Idaho. In fact, just over a week ago, the Arkansas Senate sent a bill that required parental approval for teachers to address transgender students using their preferred names and pronouns. We all know the danger that is included in outing a transgender student to their parents and what that could mean for their mental or even physical health. In addition, 19 states have restricted the ability for trans people to be athletes, both minors and adults. Most recently, Wyoming. In Kansas, there was just an overturn of the veto to ban trans women from sports. So Kansas passed a law banning trans women for sports. Their governor vetoed it, and just recently they overturned this veto. This veto is dangerous to bodily autonomy, not just by preventing trans women from playing sports, but also requiring athletes to prove the gender that they were assigned at birth. These laws are so written loosely that includes allowing for violation of children and their genitals during a sports physical to prove that they are the gender that they were assigned at birth. One example of this global fight is the fight against female genital mutilation. Female genital mutilation is the practice by which girls and teen women are taken and having their genitals mutilated, oftentimes having their clitoris removed, but sometimes even more changes to their genitals. This mutilation is often in the name of preparing them for adulthood and marriage, but oftentimes really just restricts access to their body in hopes of keeping them virgins. 300 million people alive today have undergone FGM in the 30 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia where it's practiced. In fact, the World Health Organization estimates 3 million people are at risk of female genital mutilation annually. 0 to 15 years old are the ages of the girls when this is usually carried out. So this practice is usually carried out on literal children, leading, of course, to numerous immediate and long-term health problems, including infection, scar tissue, urinary and menstrual issues, post-traumatic shock disorder, shock, and death. There are no health benefits to female genital mutilation. The fight has led to 13 countries banning female genital mutilation since 2008. 2008 is when the World Health Organization and Amnesty International focused on working with grassroots organizations to ban female genital mutilation in the countries where this is practiced. And we are seeing some successes. In fact, the majority of girls and women, roughly 7 in 10, in most African and Middle Eastern countries, believe that FGM should be banned. In Ethiopia, a country where this practice is common, now the majority of men also believe that this should be banned. So the work of these international organizations banding together with local grassroots organizations to educate and give healthcare to these women have begun a change that will hopefully see the ban of female genital mutilation soon. While we've been focusing on threats of bodily autonomy in the US, it is important to note that the fight for bodily autonomy is global. People all over the world are fighting for the right to have the body that they want, be with who they want to be with, have or not have children when they want to, and have access to education and health care. Another example of the fight for bodily autonomy globally is the Woman Life Freedom Movement in Iran. This movement started when Gina Mahsa Amini died under Iranian custody after being arrested for allegedly wearing her headscarf improperly in Tehran. She was found in a coma and died shortly, despite being only 22 years old. This led to a fervor of protest and revolutionary rhetoric along people fighting against this. People cried "Woman, Life, Freedom" as their slogan to fight for the rights of women to wear what they want and to show their bodies how they want. This has been called the biggest challenge to Iran since the 1979 revolution. Girls on the aptly named Revolution Street have bravely taken off their hijabs. And since Mina's death in September 16th, 2022, over 488 people have been killed and over 19,000 people have been arrested. However, despite the brutality against the protesters, these protests have continued, and a notable minority of women are walking around hijabless. These women are not fighting against their religion. In fact, the majority of these women are Muslim. They're fighting for the rights to present their body how they want and to practice Islam the way they see fit, without threat to their bodies by respectability police. While there have been numerous threats of bodily autonomy, it's important to note that there have been some wins in our fight. An example of this is given by the Center for Reproductive Rights in their 2022 report, which has shown that 59 countries since 1994 have liberalized abortion. Those are countries that have decriminalized abortion, removed restrictions, or have allowed abortion broadly. In fact, 26 countries have made it broadly legal. While since 1994, unfortunately, 4 countries have regressed, including Poland, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and of course the US. This shows that the fight is being successful. And while there have been some regressions, globally, we are increasing the access to reproductive health. A region that has seen a lot of success in the fight for reproductive rights is Latin America. In Latin America, Colombia has decriminalized abortion for up to 24 weeks. Abortion was actually legalized in Argentina in 2020, a victory for the Green Wave movement, so named for the people who wore green-colored bandanas and fought for feminist movements, including abortion. Last November, Puerto Rico fought for abortion rights and successfully rejected 4 bills that were intended to restrict abortion. And in Mexico, activists have succeeded in getting 8 states to recognize the legal right for women and girls to exercise their capacity to choose if they want to have a child or not, including in 2021 when the Supreme Court declared the criminalization of abortion unconstitutional. So, what can we learn from Latin American feminists? There are 3 things we can learn in the successful right for reproductive justice and bodily autonomy, and that is solidarity of multiple feminist groups, organization, and vigilance. This fight was not won by just a few people, but by many groups coming together in solidarity, often wearing green, and fighting for bodily autonomy. Organization is important. These groups relied on things like social media, which we've seen in the fight for trans rights and in the fight in Iran, to spread their message and education, such as this video, so that people understood the threats against bodily autonomy and how to fight it. And then there's vigilance. Vigilance is important because there are no rights that we have not had to defend, and no rights that we've won that we will not have to defend. So vigilance against the threats to our bodily autonomy is important. I found this quote from Giselle Carino, the CEO of Fos Feminista, saying, "The key is to support feminist movements, as they are always at the forefront of the struggle and will be the ones to sustain the changes achieved." What I think Carino means is that the key is to support progressive movements that look at and examine the threats against bodily autonomy and are fighting them across all feminist movements. And that includes reproduction, bodily autonomy in terms of what to do with our bodies, trans rights, and more. So what do? We have to protect bodily autonomy in all forms and do it by working together. As we learn from both movements locally and globally, we have to work together to fight. We have only defended the rights that we have through organization, and it can be exhausting having to defend our rights over and over again, which is why not only solidarity is important, but also radical systemic changes. This means that if I am tired or overwhelmed in fighting, that means you can pick up the tools and fight, and vice versa. Solidarity means that you're not just fighting alone, but we are working together to make a change. We also have to fight for radical systemic changes because incremental changes, while important, do not change the systemic threat against bodily autonomy. There will always be a threat to the rights for us to do what we want with our bodies, but together we can succeed. We have seen over and over again that through solidarity, organization, fighting for radical systemic changes, we are stronger than any threat to our bodily autonomy. So remember, in this fight, together we rise.
Join the global movement for bodily autonomy by sharing this video, participating in our ongoing reproductive justice actions, or leading your own. Help the national mobilization for reproductive justice win our inclusive demands listed here. Find out more at www.reprojusticenow.org.